Hi everyone, very good morning, afternoon and evening, ladies and gentlemen, and an equally warm welcome to the Singapore-IEA Regional Training Program on Low Carbon Buildings. This training program is co-organized proudly by the Energy Market Authority of Singapore and the International Energy Agency, IEA. My name is Daryl and I'll be your MC for the opening session. Before we begin, I would like to request all participants to indicate your country name followed by your registration name as your Zoom display name for easy recognition. Please also keep your microphones muted unless you are given the floor to speak. All presentations and materials during the training program will be uploaded to the IEA's website, and we will disseminate the link through email as well as our LinkedIn page. We are very grateful that all of you could join us today. To begin, I am pleased to invite Ambassador Mary Wallach, Deputy Executive Director of the IEA, to deliver her welcome remarks. Ambassador Wallach, please.
Thank you very much, Daryl, and good morning or good afternoon to all of you. I want to warmly welcome you to the Singapore-IEA Regional Training Program on Low Carbon Buildings. This year's event brings together policymakers, academics, architects, and engineers, as well as industry representatives from across Southeast Asia to share their knowledge and experience on buildings energy efficiency. I would like to thank the ASEAN community for their consistent and active engagement. This year marks 10 years of formal collaboration between the ASEAN and IEA, a real milestone for regional and global multilateral energy dialogue. I would also like to welcome all of you, our 200 participants, for this very important online training event today and tomorrow. Singapore and its Energy Market Authority have partnered with the IEA to host this event for the last 5 editions, each one unique and dynamic. And thanks to this outstanding collaboration, this event is now one of the premier regional and global training programs on a range of energy efficiency topics and priorities. Each year, we have built and executed engaging, informative, and policy relevant trainings that provide value to policymakers and thought leaders. And I would like to sincerely thank the Energy Market Authority and to say I'm very much looking forward to continuing our excellent and productive and really important relationship. 2021 is a crucial year. Urgent global policy action is needed to avoid a rebound in emissions, particularly as governments look to stimulate their economies while emerging from the COVID crisis. And as we recently reported, the early signs are not good for the world's post-COVID emissions trajectory. Emissions are already rebounding, and according to our estimations, will climb to record levels by 2023, even with the sustainable recovery measures that have been announced to date. Though 2023 emissions will be 800 million tons lower than they would have been without sustainable recovery efforts, in order to reach net zero by 2050, 2023 emissions reductions need to be more than 4 times greater. So now is the time for governments to act and to align economic recovery plans with clean energy transitions to put emissions on a faster and firmer downward trajectory. In May, the IEA released the world's roadmap to net zero by 2050. The first comprehensive global roadmap for making the energy system net zero by 2050. The path to net zero will require an immediate and massive deployment of all clean and efficient energy technologies. Our report shows the pathway to net zero by 2050 is narrow, but it's still achievable if governments act now. And to reach net zero emissions by 2050, annual clean energy investment worldwide will need to more than triple by 2030 to around $4 trillion. This will create millions of new jobs, significantly lift global economic growth, and achieve universal access to electricity and clean cooking worldwide by the end of the decade. A major worldwide push to increase energy efficiency is an essential part of these efforts. The global rate of energy efficiency improvements must average 4% a year through 2030, about 3 times the average since the beginning of the 21st century. Now, many energy efficient solutions for buildings, vehicles, home appliances, and industry are available today, and can be scaled up quickly. To take just one example, air conditioning is one of the key drivers of electricity demand growth, particularly in Asia. But our analysis shows that very efficient ACs in buildings could cut future global cooling energy demand almost in half. So the rollout of energy efficient solutions will also create lots of jobs. In fact, IEA analysis shows that energy efficiency solutions create many more jobs per dollar spent than any other energy subsector. At its core, the clean energy transition is about people. The transition must be fair and inclusive, leaving nobody behind. We have to ensure that developing economies receive the financing and technological know-how they need to build out their energy systems to meet the needs of their expanding populations and economies in a sustainable way. This week's event provides an important opportunity for us to discuss how energy efficiency can lead efforts towards emissions reductions and eventually to net zero, and which next generation energy efficiency policies are required to deliver this. Energy efficiency will play a key role in reaching net zero, and a focus on efficiency can make transitions cheaper and more effective and can help ensure energy remains affordable and secure. So I very much hope that each one of you will make the most of this opportunity to build your knowledge and networks to help tackle the challenges you are facing with fresh ideas and new tools. And as always, please know that the IEA is standing by to deliver guidance and support to practitioners, policymakers, and all of you who are real change makers as vital actors in our global clean energy transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Wallach. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Jonathan Goh, Director of the External Relations Department, Energy Market Authority of Singapore, to deliver his welcome remarks. Mr. Goh, please.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Ambassador Mayor Wallach. I thought that was an excellent, opening remarks. It really set the scene for what needs to be done for ASEAN and also the world to achieve net zero in the next decade. Well, distinguished and gentlemen, Ambassador Mary Wallach, Deputy Executive Director of the International Energy Agencies, colleagues and friends, a very warm welcome to the Singapore-IEA Regional Training Program on Low Carbon Buildings. The Energy Market Authority of Singapore is very pleased to be co-hosting the 5th training program with the International Energy Agency. This training is conducted under the Singapore-IEA Regional Training Hub Initiative, which was launched since Singapore became an association country of the IEA in 2016. And this is the second digital edition. We started having a digital edition since last year, given the circumstances due to the pandemic. Now, the objective of the Singapore IEA training, a regional training hub, is really to foster a stronger regional energy cooperation by building a more inclusive global energy architecture. It is our hope that the training hub will build enhanced capabilities among next generation policymakers and energy experts in the region and contribute towards a resilient, innovative, and sustainable energy future. Since the first training program in 2017, we have trained more than 500 participants from 20 countries on key topics such as energy efficiency, digitalization, clean energy financing, and sustainable energy policies for smart cities. This year, we are delighted to welcome 200 participants from 17 countries across the Asia-Pacific region. The theme for this year is low carbon buildings, and we thought that it's a very timely one. More people live in urban environments and societies than ever before. Based on the IEA's recent report on empowering cities for a net zero future, floor area in the building sector worldwide is expected to increase by 75% between 2020 and 2050. Now, most of this, which is 80%, will happen in emerging economies. Buildings are also currently responsible for 28% or close to 30% of global energy-related CO2 emissions. In particular, for the ASEAN region, the building sector accounted for 23% of final energy use and 24% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions over the past year. In this regard, this comprehensive training program, which is put together by IEA and a very efficient energy efficiency team in the IEA, really will aim to facilitate exchange of best practices and experience among the participants and all of you to advance sustainability for the building sector. To share at this point a little bit about what Singapore has done. Now, earlier this year, the Singapore Green Plan 2030 was announced as a whole of nation movement to advance Singapore's national agenda on sustainable development. Under the theme Energy Reset, Singapore has set numerous targets to green its buildings. Now, the public sector will play an important role in advancing some of these goals, especially under the Green gov.sg initiative. Now, close to 1,600 government-owned buildings, offices will set a target of peaking its carbon emissions around 2025 ahead of the national target of 2030. Now, the buildings and construction authorities also have a target which is called the 80-80-80 in 2030. Now, this is under their 4th Singapore Green Building Master Plan. We will aim now to green towards 80% of our buildings by gross floor area by 2030. And some of the new targets also include an 80% improvement in energy efficiency for best-in-class green buildings over the 2005 baseline, as well as an 80% target for new developments to be super low energy buildings, both by 2030. So that's why you get it 80-80-80-30. Now, all of you will hear more about the details of this interesting, very ambitious plan that we have from Mr. Noel Chin of BCA, I think today. Now, given these advancements towards low carbon buildings, this training program is especially relevant and pertinent today. Now, over the next 2 days, we hope that the training will facilitate discussions among all of you on efficient and passive design approaches and the use of low carbon materials for buildings of the future, as well as smart solutions to enable more energy efficient building operations in our cities. Now, we are pleased to also welcome experts from across the region to share, your expertise, and also, for the participants to actively engage with each other, even after the program, to really benefit from the program. As Ambassador rightly pointed out, as the region and many countries move towards a net zero future, I think we're very happy that the IEA continues to work closely with all of us in order to achieve this very ambitious endeavor. I wish everybody a very fruitful and enjoyable experience today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goh. So this year's training program has been structured in 2 modules, each involving a panel of distinguished experts who will share their experience with and perspectives on policies and technology that support the transition to energy-efficient building operations in our cities. We are also privileged to have 2 keynote presentations, the first by Mr. Noel Chin, as mentioned by Mr. Goh, of the BCA, and the second by Dr. Ian Hamilton of the IEA. So I would like to now invite Mr. Noel Chin, who is the Principal Manager of the Green Building Technology Department at the Built Environment Research and Innovation Institute of the BCA, to deliver his opening keynote. Mr. Chin, please.
Can you all hear me? Okay, right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'm Noel Chin from the Building and Construction Authority, and I'm very happy to spend the next 10 minutes to share about the 4th edition of the Singapore Green Building Master Plan and the various initiatives in our push for low carbon buildings.
Hi, Noel. You're sharing the presenter view.
Oh, okay, sorry. Let me just switch this around. Are you seeing the presenter
your
view?
PPT.
Okay, so I'm out.
No, Noel, you might want to go to the display setting.
Sorry, you can use the display setting from up left.
Sorry? Display setting, okay.
Display setting,
right, okay.
Yeah, and you can
right?
choose.
Yeah,
Not
okay.
yet.
So sorry about that. Is this okay?
Yep.
Hello. Yes. Sorry. Is this all right? Okay. So sorry about that. Yeah. I'll just run through the next slide here. So Singapore has come a long way in our green buildings journey since 2005, when we launched the inaugural Green Mark scheme. This green building rating system serves as a benchmark for evaluating a building's environmental sustainability practices, and is seen as a mitigating measure to climate change by reducing carbon emissions in buildings. And several revisions were introduced to raise the bar and push boundaries for greater emphasis on energy savings to meet our national target of 36% carbon emission reduction by 2030. Following the launch of the Green Mark scheme, BCA also launched the first Green Building Master Plan, or SGBMP in short, in 2006 to encourage new buildings developments to achieve Green Mark certification. And this was followed by the second edition, with focus on retrofitting of existing stock of buildings in order to achieve the target of greening 80% of our buildings by 2030. And the third edition focused on encouraging occupants and tenants to be more active in driving energy consumption behavioral changes and the well-being of people. To date, we have greened approximately 43% of our buildings by gross floor area, with more than half of the present green GFA going beyond legislative standards. This signals that the industry is ready to aim for higher standards. With buildings responsible for more than 20% of our country's carbon emission, there's an opportunity for the built environment to play a major role in our transition towards a low carbon and climate resilient future through Singapore's long-term low emission development strategy for 2050, where we have set ourselves an ambitious target for CO2 emissions to peak at 66 million tons of CO2 emission by 2030, and to halve this to 33 million tons CO2 emissions by 2050, with the aim of achieving net zero emissions post-2050. The fourth edition of the SGBMP will play an important role in achieving a sustainable and low carbon built environment under the energy reset pillar, and help in meeting our international climate change targets under the Singapore Green Plan 2030, which is a whole of nation movement to advance Singapore's agenda on sustainable development. The journey for the fourth edition of the SGBMP started in early 2020. BCA and the Singapore Green Building Council, or SGBC, had co-led and set up the SGBMP committee, consisting of more than 80 industry stakeholders from different points of the value chain, comprising developers, building owners, to better understand the barriers faced as well as the industry's potential to stretch for higher targets. BCA and SGBC made the early decision to reach out to a wider segment of stakeholders through various engagement platforms to co-create our shared vision and aspirations for the next step of our green building journey, given the increased awareness and interest in sustainability issues among the population. Through these engagement sessions, there were calls for higher ambitions, and the need are a key strategy to combat climate change. This culminated in the release of the SGBMP Public Engagement Report in early February this year. From the feedback and suggestions gathered, the committee had collectively shaped the vision, key outcomes, and initiatives for SGBMP that will effectively help drive the green building agenda forward. The fourth SGBMP was announced on 4th March this year by the Ministry of National Development and was appropriately coined Build Our Green Future Together. Following the announcement of the fourth edition of the SGBMP, BCA and SGBC continue to engage the wider industry and public through virtual platforms, circulars, and social media postings in order to raise awareness on the SGBMP aspirations for the next lap, co-deliver the key outcomes and initiatives for the SGBMP with wider industry involvement, and garner buy-in and support of the built environment stakeholders on aspirations for low carbon built environment through implementation of the SGBMP initiatives, and lastly, to garner greater public appreciation and understanding of the efforts by BE leaders, firms, and government in developing and driving the green building movement. In the next couple of slides, I will go through in detail how we plan to achieve the 80-80 targets. But before that, I will just go through the 3 targets that we have set in the SGBMP, namely the first outcome for 80% of the buildings GFA to be green by 2030. This is not a new target, but in the next lap, we would want to step up the pace of greening our buildings and look at improving the quality of our building stock, even those that have been green before, to continue pushing for high sustainability standards. The second outcome, for 80% of our new developments to be super low energy buildings from 2030 onwards, we aim to mainstream SLE buildings and have all buildings be SLE eventually towards a low carbon built environment. And thirdly, for an 80% improvement in energy efficiency by 2030 for best-in-class buildings through research and innovation and deployment of this new technology and solutions to market. To step up the pace of greening buildings, taken gradual steps since 2013 to increase the transparency of building energy performance to the public and benchmark the building's energy performance against similar building types and take the necessary steps to improve energy performance. Next, we are proposing to future-proof and improve the quality of building stock, both for new developments and retrofits, by raising the minimum energy efficiency requirements for new buildings and existing buildings that undergo major retrofit from the current 30% and 25% to 50% and 40% more energy efficient compared to 2005 levels respectively. This will raise the baseline and help pave the way towards supporting our second target, making super low energy buildings mainstream. The aspirations to push for greater energy efficiency will be reflected in the Green Mark 2021 scheme, where standards will be raised accordingly. Since 2005, Green Mark has been a key lever and performance benchmark for various green building policies. And the Green Mark 2021 criteria will also be ready for piloting, and we're looking for interested parties. The second target on pushing for SLE buildings from 2030 onwards follows the launch of the SLE program in 2019, and we're heartened that many of our developers and building owners have taken on the SLE challenge. To date, we have 49 SLE certified buildings with more in the pipeline. And this is a good indication that the SLE targets are not beyond reach, but is possible with the following support measures that are instrumental to the success of the SLE challenge. To help buildings achieve SLE, BCA, in collaboration with the industry and academia, developed the SLE technology roadmap. This outlines the broad strategies to help the industry to design and develop cost-effective SLE buildings. The roadmap identifies a range of technologies when put together to achieve SLE. And these technologies are grouped into 4 broad areas, namely passive strategies, active strategies, smart building management, and renewable energy, where more than 60 technologies have been identified, some of which will still need to be developed through R&D. The other strategy is to drive large-scale adoption through the Green Mark scheme. This serves as a recognition of the efforts by the developers and building owners and innovative technologies, which is essential to scale up adoption. The Green Mark scheme, coupled with green building policies and incentive schemes, have been instrumental in stimulating the growth of green buildings in Singapore. And by adding the SLE component, it would emphasize the commitment of the developer and building owners to strive for greater energy efficiency. Under the 4th SGBMP, the Green Mark SLE rating will be applicable to residential buildings as well. Various seminars and workshops were conducted to bring the industry up to speed on SLE. There were opportunities for completed R&D projects to be showcased to industry partners to collaborate and take up the technology. More than 20,000 participants have attended our events. Site visits during pre-COVID days were organized to share the best practices by some of our forerunners in the built environment and outreach efforts through our periodic publications. Other than stepping up the pace of greening our existing building stock and leveling up on sustainability standards of majority of our building stock, we also take steps to increase the take-up of super low energy buildings, with the public sector taking the lead. The public sector has always been taking the lead in any new initiatives and working the and encouragement in following suit. And we're also exploring to drive SLE adoption in the private sector. More details will be shared at a later date. Lastly, for the third target, we are pushing boundaries for buildings to achieve 80% energy efficiency compared to 2005 levels by 2030 through R&I to build deeper capabilities across the BE value chain and to strengthen the SLE ecosystem. One of the key levers is the Green Buildings Innovation Cluster program, which supports research, development, and large-scale demonstration of green building technologies and solutions. and to bring them closer to market adoption. We are looking at how we can further enhance the support of our GBIC program and expand its impact. And we also want to strengthen R&D partnerships and collaborations to develop more energy and cost-effective technologies to support the push for more SLE buildings. Lastly, to share these successful R&D and demonstration projects, we leverage on the SLE Smart Hub, which is a digital platform that provides useful information to the wider public audience. Developers, building owners, consultants, and contractors can source for the latest technology offerings in the technology directory to help them achieve SLED. They are also able to write on the Smart Advisory, which provides them with a high-level assessment of the SLE potential of their buildings before they start work on the project. And lastly, they will also be able to benchmark buildings for their own building types based on the information that we're gaining from the 20,000 buildings from Green Mark scheme. That's the last of my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chin, for that very informative presentation. Next, we would like to invite Dr. Hamilton from the IEA to give his keynote presentation and thereafter moderate Module 1. Dr. Hamilton, please.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen and we'll start my presentation. If you can confirm you can see that. Should be good. Okay, yes, well, thank you very much. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you all and also to give a very brief overview of some of the work the IEA has been leading on in this area and looking forward as well to the speakers who will join our panel, which I'll be very pleased to moderate. So with that, I'd like to just highlight one of the main issues, of course, that we're dealing with and why buildings are so important. They use over 40% or near to 40% of the energy and emissions globally. And when we look around at the residential and non-residential and the construction industry in terms of how many direct and indirect emissions, the challenge ahead of us in terms of achieving a net zero building stock of the future is that we have considerable amount of effort to be undertaken. And the benefit that we have here is that in doing so, there are, of course, going to be major benefits to environment, to emissions, to energy security. But in the light of the last 18 months, there's going to be benefits to the global economy as well. One of the key highlights of the IEA Sustainable Recovery Plan from last year was to make that point around investment and being able to build back in a more sustainable way. And I know that this is still a challenge around the world that is not yet over. And so in planning for the future, being able to take this as a way of being able to redirect the efforts around achieving greater efficiency in buildings could yield considerable economic benefits in jobs as we continue to need to stimulate the economies going forward. So in particular, buildings energy efficiency, which is an intensive and job intensive area of investment, could create substantial numbers of jobs. For every $1 million spent, it may be that it yields between 9 to 30 jobs related to energy efficiency for the building sector. So how do we get to net zero and what does that look like? The IEA last month produced a new report which was looking at net zero emissions. And in doing so, it's really important for us to understand what it is that we're facing today in terms of that challenge and how it is that we invest in buildings through behavior changes and energy efficiency and greater increases in electrification. So this slide here is really highlighting that in the effort that we undertake in decarbonizing our future building stock and our existing building stock, that efficiency is really playing a key role in reducing those emissions. And it's really important to be able to meet future service demands that we know that are going to continue to emerge. And of course, particularly in certain regions such as across Asia, the demands for cooling that will continue to grow over time. And the need therefore to build buildings which are more low energy, more passive in their design, that can avoid cooling for the future. In looking at the different technologies or different strategies that you can take to employ with net zero energy buildings, particularly looking at the envelope to avoid that cooling. So on the figure here on the left-hand side, what you can see is cooling intensity is going to drop by almost 50% in order to achieve this outcome. That's a real considerable outcome that needs to be addressed through more efficient heat pumps and cooling technologies, as well as I said before, a more efficient building design. So what is it that we need to get there? So in setting out under the net zero strategy, what it would be required for buildings, these are the key areas that need to be addressed. Energy intensity needs to improve by 6% per year between 2020 and 2030, and thereafter further increases. To put that in perspective, over the last several years, we have not yet achieved 3% per year for the most part, and this needs to increase considerably. The share of existing buildings, such as the sorts of areas that Singapore and Noel outlined, is that they need to increase in terms of their net zero readiness levels, so that way they are able to take advantage of a decarbonization of the grid. We know that behavior and avoided demands in the home and other buildings can increase, that technologies such as heat pumps, which provide both heating and cooling, should be more and more efficient, and looking at using opportunities such as passive energy through solar thermal for hot water, for example, being more readily taken up. These are not necessarily all costly technologies or designs. In fact, many of them are such that we avoid what is required to, to cool. So in terms of the future going forward, if we're to think that 2.5% of buildings are retrofit to be zero carbon ready every year by 2030, we'll be on our way, but that's a considerable undertaking. But the opportunities, of course, in terms of economic stimulus are going forward. So the IEA, we chart out the pathway to zero emissions and zero energy buildings through these different mechanisms. Energy sufficiency, being able to reduce energy needs, thinking through our energy strategies, looking at the policy instruments that can support those, whether that be land use policies in terms of better urban designs or building energy codes. And then those policy measures themselves being able to take advantage of the climate, and local resources that can better ensure energy sufficiency is being met. And with efficiency, the idea of being able to reduce demand in buildings through such as building energy codes or different policies, and ensuring that those technologies that are adopted in homes and in buildings, such as through minimum energy performance standards, are achieving outcomes that we know are capable of those technologies. And after we've addressed sufficiency and energy efficiency, we can begin to ensure that the renewable energy resources are better able to meet those demands. I'd like to highlight this, which is the Regional Roadmap for Building and Construction in Asia, which was launched last year. And it sets a target and pathway towards 2050 and achieving net zero buildings. And the importance of being able to set targets, understanding the current context, is really key. So for example, within this excellent resource that perhaps many of you have contributed to, we set out the targets and timelines to build towards that. So for example, in each of the thematic areas, which I'll describe a little bit more in tomorrow's session, around building energy codes, for example, being able to say, here we are in terms of our enforcement levels, and what do we need to be able to put in place between now and 2050, such that all buildings become compliant with code. What we also see is that building codes around the world are still required, and though they exist, they're not necessarily mandatory. And again, this is a key area that we need to address in terms of being able to reduce energy demands and ensure that we're meeting that demand sufficiently. Lastly, on building energy codes, just to give an example, what's really important for us in conveying how such policies and codes are focused is being able to look across the different end uses and systematically implement and enforce standards that we know to be achievable today, and looking through the opportunity of being creative in terms of technologies that are emerging and being applied such that we're achieving a more efficient outcome. There's also multiple benefits that we can consider. Most are not going to implement energy efficiency just for the sake of saving energy. So very briefly, this is the energy efficiency rose or flower. And the point here is that there's a multitude of outcomes that we should be seeking through energy efficiency and not just energy savings. Prices, security, poverty alleviation, health and well-being. So I know that some of our speakers are going to pick up on this, and I'd like to, of course, encourage them to think through that, that approach. So I'm going to end there because our time is short and I'd very much like to get to our speakers. I just want to note that we do have a training event, Coursework, and we will have sent this out in advance, but the aim is for you to identify a project, a technology, or a policy that you'd like to be able to share with others, and for you to write about that in a fairly summarized way in a form that we've provided. And that tomorrow, what we'd like is for several of you, if you'd like to ask the training lead, if you would share that project so that we can better understand and discuss. And in completing the homework assignment and providing these great examples, we'd be able to share with the IEA community and of course with all of yourselves following that. So to say welcome and thank you ever so much for joining us today. And what I'd like to do now is ask the panel session to come on and turn your videos on if you haven't already. And then I would very much like to invite each speaker to begin. So we'll start with Ms. Farzan Damaran, and then Dr. Perrine Hamel, Ms. Jacqueline Lam, Mrs. Fong Tran, Dr. Michael Weibel, and then Mr. Jeswin Hagaratnam. And we'll be encouraging a discussion among us. And if you have questions that you might see, if you were to write them in the chat, then we can aim to pick those up. And then otherwise, we'll have opportunity to discuss in the breakout sessions. Thank you very much. And I'll look forward now to our conversation.
Hi, thank you, Ian. So I'll just introduce myself, right, Ian? So hello, everyone. I'm Farzan, and I lead the team at Green Consultants, which is based in Singapore and Africa. I'm a board member of Singapore Green Building Council, and I'm involved in the BCA Task Force Committee for Super and Zero Energy Building. So over the last 2 years, I've been involved in a handful of super low, zero, and a positive energy building in Singapore, and I look forward to contribute in this session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Farzan. Dr. Perrine, may I ask you to say a few words?
Thank you, Ian, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Really pleased to be here. I'm Perrine Hamel. I'm a faculty at Nanyang Technological University here in Singapore. And my work focuses on what we call nature-based solutions, which are essentially solutions that rely on ecosystems, vegetation, to provide benefits to people. So I have a background in urban water management, but I now focus on a much broader suite of services, including heat mitigation, to really try and address an important issue, especially in Asian cities. And I guess I'll stop there. I'll just briefly mention a project that I'll probably talk about during the panel, which is the Cooling Singapore project, which a lot of my colleagues at NUS and SMU, other universities here in Singapore, are involved in, and that provide a lot of resources, especially at the neighborhood scale, for design and energy efficiency. Pleased to be here, and I'll leave the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Perrine. Ms. Jacqueline.
Yes, thank you very much. And good afternoon to everyone from Singapore, and good morning, good evening to all the others joining us from all the other time zones. My name is Jacqueline Lam. I'm the Deputy Regional Director for the East, Southeast Asia and Oceania zone in C40 cities. C40 cities, we have 97 member cities, and in the region that I've just mentioned, we have cities including Kuala Lumpur, Bangkok, Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, Jakarta, amongst others. So very happy to be here to contribute to this session. I'll quickly just say that over the last 18 months, the C4D team has completed climate action planning for cities such as Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh, and Quezon City in Manila, which would be, I think, a topic of interest here today as well. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Mrs. Huang Tran.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Phương Trần. I'm the founder of Vietnam Energy Efficiency Network, EN Vietnam, as well as I'm a General Secretary of International Building Performance Simulation Association Vietnam, or called IPSA Vietnam. You know, the topic today, I'm very interested in sharing with you our practical experience on pilot projects in Vietnam on high performance buildings, as well as how to bring multi-stakeholder come together from the beginning to reach the goal of energy efficiency and sustainable buildings. And yeah, look forward, and I prepare kind of some example what we did already in Vietnam, and yeah, we can share it later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And may I ask Dr. Michael Weibel?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Weibel from Hamburg University, based in Germany, actually. But I'm involved in 2 projects trying to promote sustainable buildings, one in Vietnam, one in Cambodia. The project in Cambodia is labeled Built for People. In that case, we try to promote a people-led approach, working together with environmental psychologists, trying to tackle the issue of behavior change, but we also work together with civil engineers and governance specialists, trying as well to involve multiple stakeholders and following the approach of sustainable urban transformation to promote sustainable buildings. Thank you until now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And Mr. Jaswin Hagratnam.
Thank you, Ian. And so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Jaswin Yogaratnam from Melbourne, Australia, representing Global Buildings Performance Network. I lead the policy reform work for GBPN, India and Indonesia primarily. Most of my work is in relation to looking into the regulations and law in the context of these jurisdictions, and kind of looking into the intersections in terms of where policy development and policy reform can take place. And I guess my perspective comes from a slightly different angle, so which I'll share with you later in my presentation, really looking into the potential of the unmet legal needs that needs to be looked into for purposes of policy development and reform to enable the net zero agenda to be realized. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaswin. So I think this is a really great panel that has across different perspectives, not only in jurisdiction, but in terms of the scales that are being looked at. And one of the first questions I wanted to ask the group was, because in this, this session, we're also tackling that urban scale, that idea of being able to, how you pre-design or you're able to adapt, you know, the city level. And I know that with several who are obviously key and or studying this area, I was wondering if you might give your thoughts, and perhaps Perrine, starting with yourself, just the idea of being able to look at how you better design at that scale first to be able to put yourself in the right position for low energy and efficient buildings. And then I'll invite others to comment on that as well.
Great, I'll start. Thank you, Ian. Yeah, so at the city scale, which is what I'm focusing on, city scale and neighborhood scale more than building scale, really. There are indeed a lot of mitigation actions and planning strategies that a city can take. As I mentioned, I focus more on nature-based solutions, recognizing that it's a small part, or at least one part of a much larger potential and portfolio. Someone is sharing their screen, just FYI. And the important thing to say about these nature-based solutions is that they actually providing multiple benefits at the same time. So not only they help with reducing the urban heat island, this idea that built compact cities tend to have higher temperatures than their surroundings, but also looking at local temperature reduction. So this is very intuitive. If you are next to a tree with shade, the temperature will be a little bit cooler and will feel also much cooler. And so these are the two scales at which vegetation can be important. Just to clarify what we're talking about when we're talking about nature-based solutions, they can be building level or design level nature-based solutions, such as green roofs, green walls, tree planting next to buildings. So this is where I think the connection with the building sector here and a lot of the participants' background is really strong. There's a lot that can be done at that scale, including retrofitting. But of course, at the city scale, since this was your question, there's also the idea of urban parks, green open spaces, green corridors that are really important in terms of city design. So from a scientific standpoint, we have tools that can help make better and more informed decisions on these questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Perrine. And perhaps, Jacqueline, as C40 and seeing the different initiatives that different cities are bringing forward, again, at that idea of the scale being able to help design for more efficient buildings. I'm wondering if you might remark on kind of what you're seeing as being trends coming out of the different city strategies that you are involved in or know of.
Absolutely, thank you. One of the more recent initiatives that C40 has been working on with our cities as well is on the Clean Construction Initiative. And there are a number of cities like Singapore, Auckland that are so familiar with that. It's really the concept of the carbon footprint of your building materials. So even before design, when you source building materials, where is your timber coming from? Is it coming from a sustainable source? Is your steel, are you getting recycled materials? Are you able to source locally as much as possible? We're working with cities to put in these types of requirements as far as possible to just reduce the carbon footprint of the building in itself. And of course, then designing for it also includes the energy consumption within the building. And for new builds, there's a lot of potential to have all these, designed into the building and to have all that. But of course, as Dr. Perrine mentioned earlier, for existing buildings, a lot of it relies so much on the retrofitting, on a lot of nature-based solutions as retrofits. So green roofs, solarization of their roofs as well in buildings. So there are cities in Southeast Asia, such as Quezon City, where we've worked with them on installing solar panels on municipal buildings. So they've started doing that with 50 of their local municipal schools as well. And they're looking to install solar panels on hospitals, municipal hospitals next. So there are a wide range of solutions for both new builds and existing builds, and there's so much to discuss there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. And I think that's you pick up on a really, well, several important points that maybe if Michael as well might reflect on, which is that construction activity to be able to, on one hand, more efficient designs, but the materials that are being brought to use in different cities in the region, and particularly with the Cambodia work that I'm familiar with of yours, maybe if you might describe a little bit about what's being done at that scale to be able to help shift a market access or use of technologies, and particularly also at the intersection of really advanced as well as those who are building towards more effective designs.
Thank you. Actually, the question of building materials is a very important one, and you have to pay regard which materials you use and what are their thermal qualities, and how buildings materials can contribute to insulation and to contribute to good thermal comfort of the inhabitants. But I would like to refer to another point in regard of the nature-based solutions Perrine just made. I think we have to pay attention to the microclimate, and most important of all, we have to combine the aspect of health with the aspect of sustainable buildings, particularly in times of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think health is increasingly being paid more attention to, and we have to think of ways how buildings can contribute to improve people's health. And if we talk of heat islands, buildings have an important function to relieve and decrease the effect of heat islands. We have to think of the people also taking better decisions. It's not only the behavior change of people in terms of mechanical coolants, it's also the questions that people get aware to decide, make better decisions to buy eco-friendly air conditioning devices, for example, and also like air purification devices to secure a good indoor climate. And I think all the aspect of like green corridors, open green spaces plans, green walls, green roofs can support enhancing a better microclimate. And I think the aspect of health is also a good driver and legitimation base, political legitimation base to promote the field of sustainable and energy efficient buildings. So keep in mind the aspect of health. I think it's a good solid argument to promote more sustainable buildings.
That's a really important point around the multiple benefit. Maybe before I turn to that, because I'd like to pick up on perhaps some ideas there, and also with what Vietnam in terms of pilot projects. But before going there, and I was just curious, Jeswin, what you were describing around the legal framework, because again, just kind of thinking across that scale around implementing and instituting regulations, and as you point out, the ability to have controls that allow for that or allowances. Maybe if you could describe a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of that scale and what's being done by different cities or different countries to promote more efficient building designs.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry, if I might ask Jeswin, pardon me.
Oh, sorry.
You're still on.
Thank you, Ian. So just on the question of scale in relation to the legal aspects, and this is a really interesting question. Now, from the point of regulation, you've got to ask yourself the question: what gives investor confidence into investing into a country for purposes of scale? It's having certainty in terms of law and regulations at first instance, because that's one of the first points of due diligence that one would do. So when you're talking about scale in this sense, I'd like to sort of break it up in terms of talking about demand and supply. Now, in this particular training, you talk about the demand for energy efficiency through urban planning, and a demand of efficient building fabric design, demand of low energy passive building designs, and demand of decarbonizing building materials. Now, how do you scale this? You scale this through, first of all, answering the question of supply of the unmet legal needs. And the unmet legal needs are really something that you find when you're looking at policy bottlenecks, which usually happen at the time of which you're trying to address these demands, and also at the point of where you're looking at the unmet governance and administrative bottlenecks. And many jurisdictions who have already gone through that process, and I'm sure Singapore has, listening to that the talk earlier in terms of the legislation for new buildings and existing buildings, you'd note that one of the things you need to do in terms of scaling is to have a good understanding of what those bottlenecks are. Because some jurisdictions that have implemented certain regulations, for example, did not perhaps do the due diligence at the transitionary space, and in which case you find the scale post-transition is not so effective or not happening because the capabilities and capacity building has not happened at that space. Why? Because the regulations did not allow for change management within some of the divisions of government that need to sort of provide those change management procedures in order to sort of take on board those regulations and enable for some of that net zero agenda goals to come about. I'll just pause there in terms of that question. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeswin. And perhaps now I might ask Fang, with what you've been seeing in Vietnam, and some of the pilot projects that you've been looking at, is how it is that they've been able to, on one hand, make use of those efficient design approaches, but in a context that maybe has kind of emerging sets of policies around them, and in terms of their advancing agenda. I'm just curious if you could reflect on your experience there.
Yeah, thank you. May I can share my screen to show you more detail about what we do in practical way, right?
Okay.
The first is like how everyone mentioned already, energy efficiency, much more than that. Yes, low impact and high comfort. That's the way we should put at the focus, and that's the way to engage the multi-stakeholder in the construction area, but also the relevant stakeholders work together. So today we would like to show you 2 case studies we did in Vietnam. Yes, please. Okay, the first case study, Southeast Asia, we have very diversity of microclimate and multi-culture condition. The first project I want to show you that the project in the north of Vietnam. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, so this project is we want to emphasize the point of the passive design solution. We bring the very concrete on goal setting for the comfort, for the environmental, and for the culture interactive. So that project we have the we put the multi-stakeholder from the very beginning, the local architect, the community, the engineer, and the expert. That project, we use here the totally passive design, and it improved the comfort for the school more than 53%. That project in the collaboration with a German climate engineering from Germany, which one did the first net zero building in Singapore, NUS University. And the second project is very much more in the urban area. The second one, please go ahead. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that the project in the middle of Vietnam is located in the urban area. And the point is that not only comfort, safety, environment, that we consider to give all stakeholders to contribute to get a better operating cost effectiveness. In the investment term, is how we can convince the investor say yes together. So this project, the chart, you can see that the different option on investment to bring passive design in combination with active design combined together to show to the investor and the others partners in the project different option, how they can select the option with the comfort, quality, and the environment, energy efficiency segments. So through 2 projects like that, we have the practical experience, and we want to recommend to everyone when you want to develop such kind of project. And in Vietnam is still considered as a very pilot, but there's still question mark on that. However, we have here the recommendation for you. 3 points. First, goal setting to bring all stakeholders from the beginning. Secondly, consider to account the climate, the culture, and the utilization of the building. And the last one with the verification is very much important for monitoring and put it in the level of pilot one. So that's the practical ones, and maybe that enough, or maybe
Thank
we
you.
can, yeah.
That's really great to see both those projects, of course, and also the approach you're taking around, being practical in terms of the recommendations. And I think this is something which you've all spoken to, which is that the energy efficiency is not kind of a thing we're necessarily able to convey so easily, but multiple benefits or other reasons for why instituting efficient designs or more passive designs are important. And I was just wanting to hear a reflection on how you've made the argument, or how you've seen the argument made around those additional benefits. And Pareen, perhaps starting with you, because I know you mentioned something about heat islands as well, and this is something which, you know, future cooling and managing climate change adaptation. If you could kind of reflect on multiple benefits that you're able to see using nature-based solutions, and then I can ask a few others about their experience as well.
Sure, and I think this is essentially the most important benefit of these so-called nature-based solutions, in the sense that they provide a lot of objectives. You mentioned the multi-benefit rose or flower earlier, and I think it's the same thing with the nature-based solutions, where it's about heat mitigation, as I mentioned, at the city scale and also local scale, but it's also about urban water management, which is obviously very high on the agenda of a lot of cities, mitigating flood risk, as well as dealing with water quality issues. So these vegetated solutions help absorb and infiltrate more water, so that helps with these issues. Michael made a really good point about health. A lot of these multiple benefits are about human health. So we can think about air quality improvement as well due to vegetation. We can think about physical and mental health. And during COVID, the pandemic and a lot of lockdowns all around the world, this has received quite a lot of attention. So even if for a given benefit, including heat mitigation, they may not be the best and most optimal solution, the fact that they actually strike multiple objectives is really one of the most important benefits.
Thank you, Pareen. And Michael, given that you were pointed at for kind of raising some of these issues as well, and maybe thinking of them, these multiple benefits of energy efficiency, you know, people are a core part of what you were describing. And I was wondering if that sense of conveying efficiency through multiple benefits is resonating with people in the projects that you have experience with.
Yes, I would totally agree to that. And I would like to make two further points which are important from the experience of Germany. One is that we have to apply economic incentives. In Germany, 40% of the new buildings are constructed with the support of economic incentives from the German Development Bank. So this is a huge potential, not only work with regulations and like the Energy Conservation Ordinance or other regulation frameworks, also work and try to convince people to invest into energy performance of building by providing economic incentives. The second point I would like to make in this respect is that we have to invest into capacity building, into trainings to be able to find a critical mass of people being able to measure and audit energy performance of buildings. I think in the case of Vietnam, from my observation, they have had an energy building code for a long time, but the big problem is that there's no one capable to measure energy performance. And until now, very, very few buildings in Vietnam have been erected according to the existing energy efficiency building code. So we need to also pay regard to the aspect of capacity building training to measure energy performance of buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That's a really great point around the capacity and training. And Jacqueline, I know this is something which in GBPN, you know, that connection between policy and skills and implementing that into, you know, an outcome such as a more efficient design. And this is you're probably showing something which is great that you could speak to now about that. We can't hear you if you're saying something.
Yep. Sorry, Ian.
There
Thanks.
we go.
I think just to go on that point, and you mentioned a critical point earlier in terms of people are core part of what we're doing, and that's exactly the point. And in terms of the multiple benefits, it's as what some have said, it's health, it's job creation, it's the supply chain reform that's happening, it's really the new renewables technology that's coming in, And clearly, at the end of the day, it's in relation to lower carbon emission is what we're looking at. But just to touch on some of the I guess the reform agenda that we're looking at here. At the end of the day, the question is how do you do it, right? And how do we meet these challenges in terms of the unmet legal policy needs that address the scale, that address the issues in terms of bringing people together? Of course, there's what we call the community of practice. Okay, investing in a community of practice is a great way in enabling some of those policy reform agendas to come true, because at the end of the day, even if you do have regulations and laws in place, it needs to be implemented and it needs to be regulated and it needs to actually be very much part of the conscience of the community itself, right? And so one of the things we have noted with some of the work we have done is when we set about a platform, we call it a policy platform, for example, you create what we call a people-centered approach of the community of practice that comes together to discuss, frame, and a safe space, if you want, to talk about the implementation and lessons learned. And we find that's a great way in terms of how you are empowering smart cities, which is a term IEA uses, empowering smart cities towards a net zero emissions sort of target, because you're enabling people to become the solution of what it is that we're trying to create. But importantly, I think what we're trying to also address is this supply period. The supply period, which is the transitionary period and the post-transitionary period. And this is something I'll talk about a little bit more later if we get onto the points on examples and case studies. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Jeswin. I think that you've highlighted something which is around, say, innovation in terms of policy and procedures and approaches on one hand, to be able to make use of new ideas that are coming forward, and whether that's about different planning and policy approaches, or whether that's different technologies or designs that are outside the norm. And I think that for example, nature-based, and I noted one of the questions in the chat were around different strategies one might take towards implementing those and doing so. So what I wanted to come back to the group was, in terms of innovations, do you think that we sit here today readily able to tackle the problem that we have with the different technologies and designs that we know are available? And is it purely a policy and procedural problem, or is it about also that access to technologies and their use and adoption that maybe are not yet widespread? And what would you do to solve that? So question is, can innovation help to solve both policy problems and technology problems in terms of more efficient buildings and designs? And maybe in the first instance, I might ask Phuong, your experience in Vietnam in terms of that idea around innovation to secure this efficiency.
Yeah, I think that also such kind of the question always follow what we doing with so many different partners together, with so many challenging in that topic. And what we conclude together, we see clearly that the business culture have to be changed. Is the way like how normally how everybody work together, traditional way is not integrated in the way together, and through that is so many challenging to bring everybody in the same table, the round table, to make a decision to select which way of which solution we can do and apply together. I think, for example, in Vietnam, the architecture and engineering, they work in very separate, and it's not in the way to get to combine and discussion and exchange. And through that is, I think, it's the most challenging, for sure, on the policy aspect, but in the very practical market, I think the business culture is one of the top challenge.
Okay, thanks very much. And Michael, this is something that you mentioned around Germany about being able to build coalitions, innovating in terms of our ability to work together, perhaps. I'm just curious around, was there something that you felt really changed the picture in Germany that might be appropriate or transferable to other countries?
I would say that the founding of the German Energy Agency as a cross-cutting institution was really a milestone in terms of institutional setting. This German Energy Agency has started to develop massive information and awareness campaigns, has set up an internet database with lighthouse projects, and has been responsible to introduce an energy building pass, which turned out to be a very effective market instrument. So if I sell an apartment or I sell a house, I have to show the energy performance of the building according to a reference group of similar buildings. And this is a very good instrument to convince people to invest into better energy performance of new buildings or existing buildings, retrofitting, because with a good performance in the energy building pass, I can sell the building for a higher price.
That's really interesting to know. And my apologies, Farzan, you dropped out of my screen for a little while, so I didn't get an opportunity to come back to you. You speak, or you work with lots of different groups, you know, in terms of what Green A is approaching. I wonder if you could describe a little bit based on what you've heard around innovations that you're seeing in terms of adapting different technologies and approaches, but then also if you again have a message that you feel is conveying why energy efficiency is being taken up by those groups you work with.
Yeah, hi, Ian. I agree with every speaker, which I have been listening intensely, and I do understand that there's a lot of blockage also in some of the policies and implementation in developing countries. However, in Singapore, we have another level of challenge, which is a bit different from the dialogue that is actually moving around at the moment, because we live in a very high density area and a lot of industrialized building, high energy consumption from buildings, and we have different amount of challenges as well, with a limited space, mind you, compared to the rest of the other countries around us. And we tackle it differently, and we love to be ambitious, but I think we are also very practical in what we actually deliver at the end of the day. Back to innovation, I noticed something which is very strange, because people are always waiting for the next best innovation that's going to come around. We can't wait for that, you know, we can't wait for the next best innovation. We have to do with what we have. And that means, as part of the natural climate solution base, is to actually first and foremost accept the weather that we're in. We have a tropical weather with high humidity, and therefore we should live and accept that weather. And therefore being in the shade, being not cold but cool, is something we should be very well open to. We can't always be in freezing cold in some parts of Asia, where that equates to luxury, etc. So I would say innovation to me is in two. One is do what we can for now with the current technology, but however, use it differently. Put a hybrid name or put a hybrid in between that innovation and make it into something else that work for that particular usage. As what Ian, you have pointed very well, that we have to do the advanced energy efficiency. That's the first and foremost part before we offset whatever that we can afford to offset, okay? So I think we have not explored that because we are always waiting for the next best technology to come in. And I don't think so, that's right. So over in Singapore, we have like what I think BCA Noel has pointed out, we have a bunch of innovation. However, how do you use that innovation across in different usage is something yet to be fully explored. And I would say the energy savings is yet to be fully redeemed, yeah.
Thank you very much, Farzan. I think you point out, you know, that there's a lot of opportunity of, as you say, making use of existing approaches that we have, and that innovation might simply be, in some cases, around reframing something such that it's more, you know, attractive or effective in its use. I'm just going to take this last moment because we're out of time. We started a little bit late, and this has been an exceptionally interesting conversation. So maybe the thing that I can ask each speaker to come to is a key message for, you know, what do you see the future holding for achieving energy efficiency outcomes? You know, is there something that you, as a message that you could give, if we look back in time, you say, this is the thing that made the difference? And I know I'm putting you on the spot with that, and maybe Jeswin, I noted your hand had come up, probably for a different point, but you can squeeze it in and then say, you know, what do you think will make the difference to achieve energy efficient outcomes?
Well, thank you, Ian. And I think just taking on board that point of innovation, I think what we need to look at is innovative policy strategy engagement processes. And this depends on country to country. So Singapore is perhaps pretty advanced. If you go to another ASEAN country, may not be so advanced. So the innovative policy strategy of engagement is so important because that's where you get to understand data gaps, knowledge gaps, ambition gaps, leadership gaps. And that's where you get to engage with that sort of process at that level to then bring it up to speed to where it needs to be and then scale it based on city level and what the national agenda is. So if at all, my last point is it's going to be on innovative policy strategies on engagement.
Thank you, Jeswin. And Jacqueline, can I ask you, from your C40 hat, what do you think is going to make the difference to achieving this outcome?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I think with the current drive, and I've seen in the chat box a number of questions about carbon neutrality pledges, and the current drive for many countries to pledge net zero carbon is going to be one of the biggest pushes for the energy sector, for energy efficiency to really step up and to really take a big ambitious initiatives in terms of implementing these measures, not just at scale, but also as quickly as possible, because that's something that's absolutely necessary in the next decade to halve emissions, and then by 2050 to get to net zero carbon. So I think that will really be the biggest policy and private sector push going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Pareen, can I ask you, we've heard moving fast and with partnerships, what do you see making the difference going forward?
Yeah, looks like we're all speaking the same language here. I'll also emphasize engagement, and perhaps I'll add including with the universities and institutes of higher learnings, because there's a lot of capacity in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, around these questions. So I think working together with local governments and the private sector and academia could really make a difference. If I have time for a quick second point, I'd like to emphasize what Parisan, I think, mentioned about not waiting for the next technology. And I'll say that explicitly for nature-based solutions. We don't know everything, there's still some capacity building, but we know more than enough to start making use of these solutions. And even if it's 1 degree difference, which is for like typical design, what you can expect, this can lead in Vietnam, a recent study I've done, to 20% reduction in energy consumption when there's air conditioning. So small changes can make a difference, and I think we have the tools and the knowledge to start working on this.
Excellent, thank you. And so again, moving to what makes the big difference, and just very quickly, Michael, did you have a point as well, what you see as being instrumental?
Yes, of course. Engagement is very important. In general, I would say promoting low carbon buildings is evidently not only a technological challenge. This has to be clear. Promoting low carbon buildings is a socio-cultural, socio-economic, political challenge. And we have to really try to engage multiple stakeholders, see the big picture, and deal with the different dimensions from the building user to the industry, academia, and policymaker. And of course, capacity building training is very important.
Thank you, Michael. That's really great. And Phuong, just briefly as well for yourself, what do you see making the difference going forward?
Yeah, shortly, let's say the combination of architecture, building physics, and technology innovation, that opportunity to bring multi-stakeholder come together. And it's the way we can say design right, build right, and operate right.
Excellent, a good mantra to take forward. And Farizan, as the last point, please, what briefly do you think will make the difference before we close out to join our breakout sessions?
For the quick one, I would say we have to empower people to make the decision, and to empower people is to inform them, and people make the best decisions when you have out of necessity. So if you're starved for energy, starved for water, you always make the best decision. Trust me on that. Yeah, that's it for me.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much. As you say, necessity, the mother of all innovation, and being able to make decisions now is to address a problem we have that is looming over us. So thank you all so much. I could spend the rest of the day, evening, morning speaking to you all. This has been fantastic. So now what we'll be doing is heading into our breakout sessions. And I know that each speaker, each lead in the breakout has a set of slides that we'll use as a part of the discussion. And then they'll have a few minutes right at the end that we'll come back and say thanks again as well. And just a reminder about the homework. So again, if everybody could join me in thanking our great speakers today, and really appreciate your time. And we look forward to being able to connect with you going forward as well.
A number of speakers and a range of experiences for sure. But yeah, really interesting points.
Good to see. Where are you speaking from, Perrin? Are you in Singapore or?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to this breakout session. I'd like to thank everybody for the conversation we've just had, and we'd like to try and pick up on some of these examples and ideas that people have come up with, and get some thoughts on them from more of the participants in this group. So just to start with, I'm Mel Slade, and I lead the IEA's energy efficiency work in emerging economies. And we're joined in this session by my colleague Mathieu, who's going to help us with Menti polls here. So because we're quite a big breakout group, we're going to have some structure around this, and we're going to go through a series of Menti questions so that we can make sure that everybody has a chance to participate and that we can capture people's thoughts. So that's not to say that we're not, everybody's thoughts are welcome, of course, but we're just trying to make best use of a small amount of time. If you can use Menti, of course, on your phone, your laptops, any device. So if you could go to menti.com, that would be great. And the code is being shown on the top of this slide. So it's 32050683. And what we'll do is, as we go through each question, we'll pause to let people answer the question, and then we'll try and share some thoughts on the way the answers are coming out, and people's views on the diversity, hopefully, of opinion that we find within the group. So hopefully people are getting into Menti okay. And what we'll do is, I think, go to the next slide, please, Mathieu. So easy question to start with. We just would like to capture where people are joining us from for today. And what you can do here is put a pin on your country, if you would, so that we can see where everybody comes from.
We start Australia.
Yeah. Well, sorry. Target audience for this was Southeast Asia, really.
Well,
but we're
Indonesia.
very glad to have you with us, of course. Okay, so whilst we're doing this, if anybody does want to make a comment, please use the raise hand function, and I'll do my very best to monitor that and see who if anybody wants to speak. We'll try and make it as interactive as possible. But like I say, we've not got a great deal of time. So this is good. This is telling us that our target for this training has been largely successful. We've got participants from across the region, so we've got a nice diversity in the group as well. So the next question is, so what kind of work you do? So are you a policymaker? Do you do research? Are you at school? Just let us know where you come from. This is all just so that we can understand who's in the room, and when we're making observations from what we hear, it will help us understand those hopefully better. Okay, so we're mainly in a research and analysis community here, which is very interesting. Would have liked to have seen a few more policymakers in the room, so we'll have to try harder at that next time. Votes still coming in, so I'll give it a moment. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, and this is about what sector you specialize in. Not so much your role, but what topic you focus on. So architecture, urban planning, cooling, just what topic is your main focus in your work? This is a free-for-all, so like I say, yeah, exactly. Great. So again, these are all areas that we are, of course, very interested in, and they're all important to this journey on low carbon buildings. So one of the things that we're finding in this work is the need to bring all of these disciplines together. And when we first started doing these training events, the first kind of cities oriented course we did was a couple of years ago, actually in person in Singapore. In fact, it was our last in-person event in Singapore, was on cities. And what we found really useful was getting this diverse community together who don't necessarily know each other, even within the same cities, and gaining those different perspectives. And it was really interesting to see what came out in the room when you got these people together who didn't necessarily know each other. They started to become more understanding of each other and understand why certain policy decisions were being made, understand what sort of research questions the policymakers could ask of the research and academic community too. So really good to see that we've got a nice diversity here. And the next question is, this is a bit more about opinion. So we'd like to know what you think. What countries do you think have had the most effective approaches to green building policies? It could be global, it could be in the region, just completely up to you. You can enter up to 3 countries, but only only 3 different countries. So you can't vote for Singapore 3 times. So let's see what people come up with here. So in the absence of any hands at the moment, I wonder, Jess, would you like to hazard a guess at why people think Singapore's policies are standout? What is it in your view that make them special? It may just be we've got too many Singaporeans in the group, but I'm sure there's something in this too. You're muted.
So is it Jaswin? Is it just Yogaratnam you're referring to?
Yes, you. Sorry. Yes.
Okay. Right. Look, Singapore is clearly leading the way when you look at ASEAN countries, but you know, when you take Singapore and you have to then look at, say, for example, Indonesia or Malaysia, there could be some cities in these countries that are doing well, or at least progressing towards that space. But I think why Singapore is doing well goes back to that point that I noted. The unmet legal needs are met in Singapore. To a very large extent through the legislative process and regulations, and that enables, well, a lot more, I guess, nodes of interest in terms of investing, but also then in terms of the technology that's coming in. Also, it's important to note that when you talk about decarbonizing in terms of materials, you need to think about it broadly in the context of you need to have all these tariff and incentives in place. And perhaps Singapore has moved in that direction where it's not just come up with the regulations and the tariffs, etc., and the incentives, implemented it and also applying it in a way that makes it successful. So that's my observation. Thanks.
Yeah, that concurs with our observations too generally. So, unfortunately, many governments are less comfortable with regulating. But Singapore is a great example, which shows where if you do regulate and you do it well, you do it with full consultation, but you still implement thoroughly, as you say. And also you apply a policy package, so it's the regulation plus the incentives. I think they're the standouts of the most effective buildings policies. So if in the absence of any other comments, would anybody else like to make a comment on this? No? Okay, so in the absence of any other comments, we'll go on to the next slide, please. So this is a really important question to us. Clearly you could answer this from your own experience, or you could answer it from what you heard in the presentations earlier, but we're interested in the ranking, I suppose, of all these measures that are all clearly very important, all very much in the news. But what's your view on the prioritization, if you wouldn't mind? So perhaps we don't know how to answer this question. So Mathieu, can you explain how this one works, please?
I'm not too sure. I think like a bit. Oh yeah, it's working now.
Okay, just a glitch then.
Sometimes until everybody was responding.
Okay. Right, so this is I think this is really interesting because the energy efficiency in the context of urban form and planning is something that we haven't heard a lot about until very recent times, and we do see that quite often the urban planning community and the energy efficiency community are separate, quite separate in most places. And as I said earlier, we don't even know each other and don't understand each other's priorities and even kind of lens perspective on how they make decisions. So I'm really encouraged to see the recognition of how important this is. It's a tricky problem because everybody has their own practices and procedures, ways of operating, and if we need to challenge those norms, if we need to break down traditional barriers, then of course we're gonna find that a big challenge. And just to a point that was made earlier, we clearly need to scale up, but do it fast too. So that area, I worry that the improving the urban form and planning area is one that might take some time. Whereas if you think of the things like retrofits and renovations, perhaps there's something there that we can do much more quickly. We can also do the smart devices for demand side reduction and operational efficiency. We can do that quickly. We know how to do that. But some of these other things will take a bit of time. So maybe, again, I'm going to pick on somebody because I can't see any hands. So maybe Perrine, would you like to make any observation about this set of results? What does it say to you?
Yeah, I think to reflect on what you just mentioned about urban form being an important at the top of the list right now, even though I think the main result is that everything is important. It seems like there's a lot of agreement on that. But it's a good point about the communities of practice being quite separate. I'm talking about the urban planning and kind of building level. And perhaps an important stakeholder here to consider is the real estate development and developers that can really help bridge this gap between the two communities, because they do work at these two scales for a lot of projects. So they have some influence on the neighborhood scale design or plot size, as well as the buildings themselves. So perhaps something to reflect on as well.
Great. Yeah, I think that's an important point. I mean, tomorrow we'll talk a bit more about the kind of equipment side end of things. You know, what goes in our buildings and what systems we use to operate them. But obviously today we were hoping to capture as much thought as possible on that urban planning question and things like resilience as well, and passive house too. Can I encourage anybody else to make any comments here?
Hi Mel, maybe I'll just chime in. Just taking it from the top. I mean, in terms of improving urban form and planning for building efficiency, there are a few things need to consider. Are you talking about a new development, or something that's existing, and also which cities? Some cities, like if you take Jakarta, for example, where it's highly saturated in terms of thinking about replanning it. It's a whole process in itself, which is why they're building a new capital, a new city in East Kalimantan now. But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that it's important to understand zoning codes and how maybe you need to create some form of reform in zoning codes in order to enable some form of development for green building purposes. Because as you know, commercial areas within some of the prime cities are really for commercial buildings, which may not necessarily have the imperatives to be then converted for green building purposes. But if there's some reform done in the context of zoning or rezoning from a planning perspective, then that could provide maybe a designated area that's rezoned for that particular purpose, and which then provides an opportunity for urban planning in the green building context for in a city sort of environment. And also just in the context of retrofits and renovations, also it depends where you're doing. So let's take, for example, in Indonesia, and you're going to a city like Bandung. Now, Bandung has got it's a beautiful city, and it's got many heritage buildings. So when you're talking about retrofitting, there's another layer of challenge. Number one, it's zoned under heritage buildings, so the street, that particular area. And number two, the added challenge of retrofitting such a building because of all the planning restrictions or the building restrictions or design restrictions of such a building comes into play. So these are considerations that make a point of difference between how some cities are moving faster and some cities need to take its time. And I think it's really good to take its time, because you need to be able to, as I said previously, understand the transitionary measures that need to take place before just implementing a retrofit or a new building design. That's my take on that.
Thank you. Yeah, very good points. So would you like to suggest somewhere where you think that's done particularly well?
Well, I perhaps won't make a recommendation in that sense. I mean, of course, there's always Singapore as your primary example. But I think what is good to note is how some of the burgeoning cities in ASEAN, if you want to take Indonesia, is trying to get there through the reform process that it's taking through. So, for example, when you think about the new capital city in East Kalimantan, they are actually trying to develop a new model code that has the green and smart city imperatives. So that is a place to look out for. And we have to understand and appreciate the fact that it's not easy to redesign or remodel or even retrofit all the cities, because there's a whole lot of redevelopment and you may have to consider whether there's going to be compulsory acquisition of land for that to do and people's lives. So all the socioeconomic factors need to be considered. But I wouldn't want to single out anyone, because we're all at different levels. And I think the way I measure progress or success is not just looking at Singapore because it's advanced so much, but rather how some of the developing countries are progressing in terms of trying to push forward with policy development and also the advocacy and bringing people together to make that difference in that small way, but in an effective way that's trying to meet those targets.
Great, thank you. So I just maybe if, again, I can't actually see a list of participants here. I don't know whether you can help me with that, Paula, because I'd like to be able to call on a few people and I can not see the list. But whilst hopefully we're sorting that out, maybe some other examples that haven't come up in the conversation today. So in terms of the planning aspects of things, for example, here in Paris, if organizations go beyond code, they can potentially have a more intense building space, so they can have maybe a couple more stories on a building, which of course is hugely valuable. And even here, green roofs or rooftop solar are requirements of new builds and major refurbishments. So even in a city where, like you say, Jess, there's a huge amount of heritage building, which is very, very difficult to, retrofit in a conventional way. There are measures like that being taken where infill is possible and where refurbishments are happening. Even on a heritage building, quite often the roof is something that you can do something with. So people are being very creative and appealing as much as possible to the investor. So as you also said, one of the reasons Singapore's been successful is both investors in buildings and in technologies are confident that policy settings are going to be long term and they're going to be legally binding. So it's worth their while investing in that market. They feel that they're going to get their returns. And I think that's a really strong message for other countries in the region. If they want to attract investment, it's really, really critical to have these very long-term settings that are very clearly understood, that are legally bound, so that it's not just public sector money that's going into this, but you can encourage private sector investment, because that's what the private sector always says to us when we ask. That's what they say they need in order to be able to kind of move into markets. So I can now see the list, and maybe I would quite like to see if I can get some inputs here from anybody in the region. So maybe I could say we have a couple of participants here from Indonesia. So, I mean, Amalia, hopefully you can hear me. Would you like to make any comments on this prioritization from an Indonesian perspective? No? Okay. Let's try then Firman Susanto, also from Indonesia. Do you have any thoughts on these perspectives?
So I'm from Indonesia.
Welcome.
Yes. Welcome. I'm also
can you
from
turn your
Bandung,
camera on?
actually. Oh, okay. Yes. Well,
Thank
I'm
you.
also from Bandung, so when Mr. Jess said about Bandung, so I remember about the heritage building in Bandung. There's a lot, but when we are talking about retrofit and renovation on existing structure, actually I don't agree if we have to demolish the cultural the heritage building in Bandung to rebuild the new building, new green building. But maybe on the for new building, for the regulation of green building, we could apply it for new building, not all for the retrofit or existing building. I think it's important because maybe the for heritage building especially, it's become the iconic or symbol of the city. So that's all that I can comment about the retrofits and renovation.
Thank you. We're very aware how keen the city of Bandung is on energy efficiency and improving buildings. We have a meeting later on in the week with the deputy mayor of Bandung, who wants to talk to the IEA about the subject. So great to meet you today, and I can tell the mayor when we speak to him that we had good participation
Yes.
from his city. So that's great. Now maybe we could see if we can get somebody from let's see somebody from Malaysia. So Ramlan, are you able to make any comments about so Ramlan Zelani, are you able to make any comments about this prioritization? No? Maybe try somebody else. So we've got a few people.
Can I just chime in just to take on board
yeah.
the comment by the other lady earlier? I think it's an excellent comment she made. I'm so pleased they're getting to meet the Bandung deputy mayor. I think one thing to note in relation to that Bandung is it's one of the places where, number one, green building regulations in Indonesia was sort of implemented. So it's Bandung, Semarang, Jakarta, and of course looking to new capital now. But interestingly, also Bandung was where they tried to sort of implement the incentives, and here's where it becomes interesting, in terms of where incentives are implemented. What is the take on incentives? And some of the studies or some of the feedback we have received in that context is, while the incentives are there, it is perhaps not well socialized or operationalized. And this is for various reasons. And I think one, the capacity of the Dinas Penataan, I think she's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a town planning agency there, or city planning agency. There's a need for those organizations and the others, like the tax authorities, for example, to coordinate how that works. And this is the other observation, and I'm not just referring this to Indonesia as such, but generally I find the coordination gap of primary agencies that need to work together to make some of the policies work. So yes, primarily you're looking at the say the Ministry of Housing and Public Works and Housing, but you're also then looking at the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Environment, and of course now when you have the advent of the e-vehicle and buildings connected, you're looking at the Ministry of Transportation. So as what was noted with Singapore earlier, where you're looking at that whole nation approach, in some other countries, you're looking at a whole government approach, but more selectively in the context of those that have an impact in terms of that building. So that's perhaps something, Mel, that you may want to share with the deputy mayor.
Absolutely. I'm going to have to stop you there because we're going to be sent back into the plenary just for some closing remarks. But I do thank you just for those comments and for your support in this session in particular and your presentation, and also, of course, our colleague from Bandung. So we will be taking up those points. I completely agree with them. We've seen them in Indonesia and other sectors as well. So we'll call this to a close now. Thank you for your participation. And from my perspective, I'll see you tomorrow. And we'll go back now for Ian to make some closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining. We're just going to wait for the different groups to come in, and I think they will very shortly. But I hope, like yourselves, we had a really interesting conversation that ranged from policies and kind of innovations, I suppose, but more one around familiarity with appropriate designs to the region that could be better adapted, rather than making use of design strategy, low energy design strategies that really kind of didn't reflect necessarily, sorry, not low energy, but design strategy that didn't reflect the context. And so being able to point out, how being able to build more efficiently through passive measures is going to take more effort and work on our side to, take the burden of proof and really showcase how effective it is to be able to achieve the outcomes that we're talking about in terms of energy efficiency. So I wanted to, if there's an opportunity now, and otherwise, Mel, you can always correct me, and Daryl as well, but if I could just go back to the coursework for just a moment to just highlight that, so that we can, if there's any questions that you might have, you can pose them to the coordinator. And then that way we can just sign off for the end of the session as well, with a concluding remark. But I'll just quickly share my screen again, if that's all right. So to go to the training event coursework, you should all have been sent a form that we're encouraging you to think creatively, identify a project or a policy or some technology that's been implemented that really showcases what we're discussing today, which is, something that is able to assist our transition to zero carbon emission building stock. And we would really like for that to be an example coming from your own country, wherever possible, or your own city. And if it'd be something that tomorrow we'll be asking for a few to raise your hand and tell us a little bit about that, because I think it'd be really nice to hear of examples that you think are inspiring to you. And we'll only have a little bit of time, but for anybody who feels really well prepared and they want to showcase that, if you had an image of that building or technology or a description of the policy, it'd be great to hear about that. So the form, the idea for it is to be filled in. It's not meant to be very long or an intensive exercise, but if you could complete that within 48 hours of the end of tomorrow and to submit that to the email address that's on the form, we'd really appreciate your assistance for that. And if we can identify some good examples, across this that we can share with everybody else, we'll be really, really pleased. So on that, I should say that we're at our close. Mel or Daryl, I'm not sure if you wanted to say anything else, but I've really appreciated everybody's involvement today, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow as well.
Maybe I could just say thank you, Ian, and thank you very much, Daryl, for being our MC for today and for taking us smoothly through that opening session. So hopefully everybody has enough to think about overnight, and we'll see you again tomorrow afternoon. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, everyone.